Today, we're venturing into something we all experience but maybe don't fully grasp: solitude,
Yeah.
just being alone.
Yeah, it's everywhere, but what's really going on?
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack what happens inside us, emotionally, psychologically, when we actually step away from everything and just exist.
We've looked at some really interesting research on this.
We have, and the common idea is often that solitude is kind of slow, maybe boring, or
hmm
even from some psych perspectives, potentially not great if it goes on too long.
Right, like it's just less than being with people.
But the studies we looked at, they paint a much richer picture. There's some surprising effects, both, well, maybe expected and unexpected.
Okay, but let's pin down what kind of solitude we're talking about because, sitting alone scrolling on your phone, that's not really it, is it?
Definitely not. The researchers were really specific here. They defined it as the psychological experience of being alone without communication.
Exactly. And also without external stuff to do, like hobbies or even, say, listening to music or a podcast, it's basically just you and your thoughts. A pretty pure state.
Wow. Okay, so like the hardcore version of being alone. And they specifically separate this from, say, feeling lonely or being shy, right?
That's crucial. Yeah. This isn't about why you're alone, like social rejection or withdrawal. It's about the state itself.
Gotcha. It's his own thing.
And even within that, what you do while alone matters, like just sitting versus, say, reading, different experiences.
Okay, that leads us right into the first big finding they talked about, something called a deactivation effect. Sounds a bit technical.
It does, but the idea is pretty straightforward. Essentially, what they found is that this kind of solitude tends to lower the intensity of our really strong emotions.
Strong emotions, like being really happy or really angry.
Exactly, especially the high arousal ones.
Oh,
So
okay.
think feeling really alert, excited, enthusiastic. Those are the positive high arousal ones.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, feeling nervous, anxious, maybe irritable, the negative high arousal ones, solitude seems to kind of dial those down.
Huh. So it chills you out, basically, if you're feeling super intense.
That seems to be the gist of it, yeah.
hmm
The first study found this happened when people were alone in that specific way, but interestingly, not when they were interacting socially.
So talking to someone, even casually, didn't have that same calming effect on those big feelings.
Apparently not, based on this study. And then study two took it a step further. They wondered, okay, is this just because there's nothing happening, like boredom?
Right? Lack of simulation. So they had people alone, but some were just sitting and others were reading.
Exactly. They gave some participants a book. And the interesting part, the deactivation effect on those high arousal feelings, both the good and the bad, high energy ones, it still happened, even for the readers.
Whoa. Okay, so it's not just having nothing to do. There's something about the aloneness itself.
That's what it strongly suggests. It's not simply the absence of external input. Something about being in that solitary state seems to trigger this emotional downregulation for intense feelings.
That's pretty fascinating. Counterintuitive almost.
It is a bit, isn't it? Now, they also looked at the low arousal feelings in that second study. The quieter ones.
Like feeling calm or maybe sad.
Precisely. Calm, relaxed on the positive side, lonely, sad, bored on the negative. And they found small increases in both of those during solitude. Just marginal, but noticeable.
So the volume goes down on the loud emotions, and maybe the quiet ones become a bit clearer. Both the peaceful ones and the slightly down ones.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. Which naturally raises the next question. What if you're not just sitting there passively? What if you're actively thinking?
Ah, okay, so engaging the mind while alone. That was study 3.
Yep. They compared that pure solitude state with being alone but actively thinking. And crucially, they looked at whether people chose what to think about.
Choice. That feels important. Like deciding to meditate versus being told, okay, now think about puppies.
Exactly that kind of difference. So some people were told to think about positive things, some neutral. But within that, some got to pick their own positive or neutral topic, while others were sort of assigned one.
And what happened? Did thinking positive thoughts help?
It did seem to buffer the drop in those positive high arousal feelings. So focusing on good stuff helped keep some of that positive energy, you could say.
Makes sense. But what about the choice part? Did choosing your topic matter, even if it was just neutral?
Yes, that seemed to be key. The act of choosing what to think about, whether it was positive or even neutral, also lessened that decrease in positive high arousal effect compared to when people were just assigned a topic. Autonomy, even in thought, seems powerful.
Huh. So being the driver of your own thoughts, even quiet ones, changes the experience.
It really seems to. And there was another interesting bit. Thinking especially positive thoughts, whether chosen or assigned, also seemed to reduce that slight increase in the negative low arousal feelings, like loneliness.
So keeping your mind engaged, ideally on your own terms, can make solitude feel less flat or lonely.
That appears to be the case. It suggests solitude isn't just passive, we can shape the experience. The researchers even suggested we could use solitude, maybe intentionally direct our thoughts within it to help manage our emotions.
Like use it strategically.
Mm,
If you're feeling overwhelmed or angry, maybe some quiet time focusing on something calming could help. Or if you're feeling flat, maybe focusing on positive things.
exactly. Solitude is a potential tool for emotional regulation, which is quite a shift from just thinking of it as time alone.
Definitely. Okay, so that brings us to the last piece, study 4. This one looks more at the why, right? Like why someone chooses to be alone. Motivation.
Yes, precisely. They focused on autonomy, basically. How much did the person actually want to be alone versus feeling like they had to be?
How do they measure that?
They did a daily diary study over 2 weeks. Participants had periods where they were instructed to be alone, and they used something called the Relative Autonomy Index, the RAI, to gauge how much people felt that alone time was self-chosen versus imposed.
Okay, so measuring the want to versus have to. What did they find? Did the deactivation thing still happen?
Generally, yes. That core effect of lowering high arousal emotions seemed to happen regardless of how much autonomy people felt. That part seems pretty consistent with pure solitude.
But. I sense a but coming. Autonomy mattered for something else.
A big but. It really mattered for the other well-being aspects. For people who felt low autonomy, like they were being forced into solitude, they actually experienced more negative effects.
Like what?
Things like lower levels of those calm, relaxed feelings, higher levels of loneliness and sadness, potentially more stress, lower life satisfaction on those days, feeling like their basic psychological needs weren't being met.
Oof. So unwanted solitude is actually pretty bad for you.
It certainly looks that way from this study. It's not restorative then, it's stressful.
But what about the people who wanted to be alone? High autonomy.
Ah, well, that's the flip side. For those individuals, high autonomy was linked to greater low arousal positive affect more feelings of calm and relaxation, and potentially less stress on those solitude days, too.
So actively choosing it, wanting that alone time, seems to unlock the good stuff. The relaxation, the stress reduction.
That appears to be the key. Wanting to be alone seems crucial for experiencing those more beneficial aspects. It really highlights that our motivation shapes the outcome, even for something as simple as being by yourself.
Okay, wow. So let's try and wrap this up. What are the main headlines from this deep dive?
Well, first, pure solitude tends to turn down the volume on intense emotions, the highs and lows. Well, mostly the high energy
All
ones.
right, the deactivation effect.
Exactly. And it might slightly increase the quieter feelings, both calm and maybe lonely ones.
But crucially, it's not that simple. What we do with our minds matters.
Mm-hmm. Thinking, especially positive thoughts, and even more so, choosing what to think about, can really shift the experience. It can help keep positive feelings up and maybe keep loneliness down.
And the final piece, autonomy. Wanting to be alone seems absolutely key to getting the restorative benefits, like feeling calm and less stressed.
Absolutely. If solitude feels forced, it can backfire. If it's chosen, it seems much more likely to be beneficial.
It really changes the perception, doesn't it? From solitude being this passive, maybe negative state, to something quite dynamic and potentially really valuable if we approach it right.
It does. It's far more nuanced than just being alone is good or being alone is bad. Depends on the context, our mindset, and our motivation.
So for everyone listening, maybe the takeaway isn't just about whether you spend time alone, but how and why.
Right.
Here's something to think about. How might consciously choosing a moment of solitude, maybe deciding beforehand what you'll gently focus your thoughts on, or simply allowing thoughts without pressure, how might that impact your emotional state day to day?
Could it be a tool you use more intentionally?
Yeah. It seems understanding this opens up possibilities for maybe better self-awareness, better emotional regulation, not just seeing alone time as empty time,
Yeah.
but maybe intentional space,
Yeah.
something to explore.